It's been a week of meetings on Parliament Hill between the Prime Minister and opposition leaders. But after the photo ops and closed-door meetings, not everyone left with the same message.
It's up to Justin Trudeau to find common ground to make this Parliament last.
What has been discussed suggests strongly that a lot of these issues will be consensual.
I have no interest in blindly working with the Liberals.
So, how are the leaders playing their cards, and what does this mean for the upcoming throne speech?
It is Thursday, so time to bring in At Issue. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto tonight. Shachi Kurl is in Vancouver, and Aaron Wary is here in Ottawa with me tonight. Good to see you all. So we saw those meetings take place. I should point out there's one more tomorrow with Elizabeth May. At this stage, Andrew, do you think that the Prime Minister has sent the right signals about his intent going into the parliamentary session, which we now know will start on December 5th?
It depends what you mean by the right signals.
Cooperative signals.
Not particularly, no. I don't think anybody has. I think all of this has been very performative. People have to be seen to be talking to one another, but nobody really has much of an incentive at this point to make much in the way of conciliatory moves. Not the premiers in the West who are playing to their gallery, not the opposition parties who have different constituencies also to attend to, and certainly not the Prime Minister, who knows that nobody really wants an election anytime soon, and I don't think is going to be particularly in a mood to make any extravagant concessions. He's got to himself play to the broader gallery of the public. He can't look like he's just saying my way or the highway, but as long as he does the right politesse and the right performances, I think he's in a relatively strong position.
So, Shachi, do you think that opposition leaders coming out and sort of going through their laundry list of things that they need to see or want to see, does that carry any weight at all, should it?
Well, it really depends on how skillfully the Prime Minister actually handles all of these machinations. Who knows how that's going to go, but, he is in the catbird seat because he gets to go to each of these opposition leaders, each of the premiers, and sort of say, may I take your order? What can I do for you? And be mindful of the fact that this is also a lot of inside the Beltway or inside baseball for people who are watching it from afar. It's a lot of meetings to follow, a lot of scrums coming out of it to keep track of. What Canadians are looking for are their priorities. Okay, so what are those priorities? They want to see movement on tax cuts. That's something that voters across the board said yes to. They want to see some improvement on health care. So, stay tuned for more probably on a pharmacare plan of some point or some kind. And then you will have enough voters on both sides, 2/3 who said yes to a carbon tax and 2/3 who voted Liberal and Conservative who said yes on pipeline matters to want to see some movement on that. So there is the war of words and there is the leaders trying to sort of jockey for position here. But ultimately, I think Trudeau knows if he doesn't screw this up, he's got enough room to maneuver on those priority measures.
Yeah, and that's what it seems to me too, Aaron, that there's a lot of opportunity here to cut deals with various people.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to do this dance now for as long as this Parliament lasts, where opposition leaders come out and we ask them what their demands are, and they say what their demands are, and then we ask them whether they're ready to force an election if their demands aren't met, and they'll waffle and we'll get mad. And this will go on for at least until the next election. But I do think there is a slight convergence here of interests, right? The Bloc and the NDP are looking to sort of reestablish themselves as important and influential forces in Ottawa. The Prime Minister and his government, he wants to show that he can govern well, that he can work with other parties. He wants to build up a record that he can take into the next election. You would think that there'd be some way for those three sides to work together. It's going to be messy, but there should be some way for these guys to come together at some point to move an agenda forward. There will be, the inevitable jockeying for who gets to take credit for every accomplishment. And at some point, that will break down. But you would think at this point, at least in the short term, again, no one wants an election, and there is there's a shared mutual interest in sort of making this Parliament work at least for a little while.
And Rosie,
Yeah, go ahead, Chachi, and then
there's also one more constraint that this government, however it works, is freed from, and that's the fact that, again, you saw a significant number of people who opted for this particular configuration of Parliament saying, we're not worried about spending. So this could be a very spendy time as the Prime Minister tries to get things done, sort of reminiscent of what his dad did in that 72 to 74 minority Parliament, and that was a time of big spending too. So we'll see if that happens.
Andrew.
as with the Stephen Harper minority, the strength of the government's position is you need all three party leaders to pull the lever at the same time to force an election, all three opposition party leaders. So what that means is this isn't just a game of chicken between the government and the opposition. It's a four-way game of chicken. It's all the opposition leaders playing chicken with each other, saying, well, I'm going to bring the government down. I'm going to vote against this bill, and trying to force the other ones to be seen to be the ones propping the government up. So we'll see a lot of that kind of jockeying as well, of people announcing ahead of time that they're going to vote against this or that and putting the pressure on one of the other parties.
Oh man, it's going to be so interesting. There is a reason journalists like minority governments. Okay, I want to shift to that exchange between Yves-François Blanchet and then the response from Kenney this week, because it just sort of it feeds more into our conversations about Western alienation or alienation of Alberta and Saskatchewan, because some people get mad at me in BC when I say that. Anyway, here's what Blanchet had to say on Jason Kenney.
They were attempting to create a green state in Western Canada. I might be tempted to help them. If they are trying to create an oil state in Western Canada, they cannot expect any help from us.
If you are so opposed to the energy that we produced in Alberta, then why are you so keen on taking the money generated by the oil field workers in this province and across Western Canada?
Okay, so Aaron, did that back and forth surprise you at all, and what should we make of how that's going to sort of define the country, at least in the short term?
Yeah, I don't think we should be necessarily surprised that the leader of the Bloc Quebecois is not particularly worried about the resources in Alberta and whether or not they can get to market. And I guess we also shouldn't be surprised that Jason Kenney and Andrew Scheer are jumping on this as an opportunity to sort of stick up for the West, to stick up for the resource sector, to stick up for their own constituents, their own base. I think it is indicative of, we're going to hear more of this, I'm sure. This discussion we've been having, especially over the last few weeks, about Western alienation in the resource sector isn't going to go away magically. I think if there is a sort of a larger issue here, it's what Trudeau is going to have to do in terms of balancing out, as we just said, working with the NDP, working with the Bloc, working on climate issues, while at the same time trying to work with premiers, or at least show that he is trying to address Western alienation. He can't just pick one or the other. He has to somehow try to do both. And he has to, I guess, hope that there's no point where, working with the Bloc or the NDP in the House to get legislation passed, expressly goes against Western interests and puts him in a position where it seems like he's picking sides.
And this, of course, happened the same week that Scott Moe finally got his meeting with the Prime Minister, and he was not thrilled with the outcome of that either. Sachi.
So the rhetoric that you're hearing from Jason Kenney and Scott Moe isn't just about premiers trying to be lightning rods and rile up, their bases at home for political expediency. Sure, there's a part of that, but it's also very much based in the fact that there is tremendous anxiety and worry coming out of those two provinces. We look at economic confidence. The number of people in those two provinces who are worried about someone losing a job in their household in the coming months is more than 2 times the national average. So this is coming from somewhere. And there will have to be a point beyond the political machinations that we've talked about where all of these leaders are going to have to check themselves, get a grip, and say, well, what are we doing in the interests of the nation as a whole? The Jason Kenneys of the world, in the same way that the François Legaults of the world, run the risk of whipping up too much nationalist or provincialist sentiment in their provinces, whereby they unleash something, and we're starting to perhaps see the beginnings of that in Alberta and Saskatchewan with the Wexit movement, that they may not be able to put back. They won't be able to put that genie back in the bottle later, and so they've got to now be a little bit more focused on solutions as well, and it's going to take 2 to tango on that front. We need to see the change in tone from Justin Trudeau, but we also need to see a willingness to work from those two.
Jason Kenney did put out sort of a roadmap of solutions. I mean, you can think that they're not possible or not like them, but he did put forward some of the things he would look at, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't know better, I would say Blanchet was being deliberately provocative. I mean, he not only saying, yeah, we'll take the equalization money, but we're not going to take the pipelines, as if Quebec actually has any authority to say so. It's simply a political clout. But also on top of that, I think Vashi Kapelos on your Politics and Power and Politics panel was saying, well, why are you so averse to pipelines given Quebec is getting oil by pipeline from Alberta now, 44% of its needs? And his answer was basically, well, we have enough for our purposes, so therefore we're not going to be cooperative any further. So he's really being as antagonistic and as annoying as he possibly can, and you could absolutely forgive Albertans for being outraged by that. I guess I hope that the response in Alberta and Saskatchewan is not going to be, as I fear it may, that the answer to all this is to be as inward-looking and as antagonistic as Quebec's political class has been, to use this occasion to, as premiers always do, grab for more money and powers for themselves, to turn inward, to stop trying to think about what's good for the country as a whole. There's a lot of rhetoric going out right now that's basically saying to people, let's just put up walls, let's just take care of our own. And if everybody in the country does that, then we're all going to be diminished.
Okay. On that not very happy note, but something to think about as always. We'll thank you all and let you go. Thanks everybody. Before we go though, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. This week we're talking about cabinet speculation ahead of next week's swearing in. Look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.